Welcome, sleepless spirit. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to guide you gently into the shadows of slumber, where dreams take over and worries fade away. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime tales, whispered just for you. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it as you listen tonight? And if there's a story you've been longing to hear, something spooky, something comforting, tell me. I'm always listening. Now, tuck yourself in. Let the darkness wrap around you like a warm blanket. It's time to let go and drift into the story. I'm Samantha Blake, and I work as a photographer, or I was anyway. I'm not really sure who I am now. It's been 3 years since I last picked up my camera, not since that night in Georgia's sweltering backcountry. Capturing the beauty of decay was my obsession. How man's creations are reclaimed by nature. I focused on deserted locations, deserted farmhouses, abandoned factories, and my favorite ancient cathedrals. A temple of worship left to the elements has a certain melancholy beauty, a silent reminder of time's passing and faith's decline. I was drawn to rural Georgia for that reason. The area is full of stunning skeletal chapels, each with a unique tale to tell. The day it occurred began similarly to the rest of my journey. I had spent the morning investigating a grist mill that had fallen close to the Flint River. The fine dust of centuries is illuminated by the afternoon light that filters through the damaged ceiling. The golden hour, that enchanted period right before sunset when the world is illuminated by a gentle, warm light, was what I was hunting by late afternoon. A pin I set on a satellite map led me to a location that appeared to be a clearing with a small rectangular building, a possible chapel tucked away from the major highways, and I was driving my reliable, although little worn, Jeep down a succession of progressively narrower roads. The gravel replaced the asphalt, and the gravel led to a packed earth track that was just a little too narrow for my car. The Spanish moss-covered trees around me, their branches creating a canopy that reflected the light and gave the impression that the air was calm and dense. The only sounds to break the timeless silence were the crunch of my tires and the cicadas. I was really alone, and I enjoyed it that way. When no one else is there to create noise, it's simpler to hear the murmurs of the past. Then I noticed it. The church was in a little overgrown clearing set back from the dirt track. It was the ideal specimen that I had been searching for. It was a plain white wooden building with a small steeple, the aged grey wood below showing through the paint like sunburned skin. The arched windows were towering, but some of the panes were gone, leaving the eyes dark and empty. To its right was a tiny, unkempt cemetery with ivy-covered headstones that leaned at strange angles. It was flawless, heartbreaking, and lovely. The rumble of the engine sounded like a sacrilege in the deep calm. I dragged my Jeep across the overgrown grass, my pulse racing with the old rush of discovery. I reached for my camera bag. As usual for an evening in Georgia, the air was damp and heavy. However, as soon as I got out of the car, I felt as though the church itself was strangely cold. I wrote it off as a trick of the shade, the refreshing breath of a structure that had been deprived of the warmth of the sun for decades. I started my ritual by walking around the structure to get a sense of its angles and how the light was falling on it. Long, warped shadows spread from the base of the tombstones like clinging fingers as the sun started to set. I framed a picture of the steeple with its plain cross silhouetted against a purple and orange-hued sky. The first genuine feeling of fear struck me as I peered through the viewfinder. It was more than a sense of isolation. It was a sense of being observed. You know nothing is there, yet you still want to turn around because of the prickling feeling on the back of your neck. I lowered my camera and looked at the tree line and the shadowy spaces between the windows of the church. Just the shifting moss and the growing darkness. I scolded myself and shook my head. I have seen other locations similar to this one, which were much more isolated and eerie. The loneliness and approaching dusk just heightened my imagination. I made the decision to move closer in order to photograph the rusty hinges on the hefty oak doors, the texture of the peeling paint, and other details. The entrance doors were securely locked with a large padlock that looked old. I looked into the thick blackness inside through a crevice between them. The air leaking out was stale, with a scent of rotting wood, moist ground, and something strange, something reminiscent of ancient, dried-out funeral wreaths with a hint of flowers. I experienced that coolness once more as I proceeded along the church's side, but it was stronger this time. I felt as though I had entered a pocket of cold by passing through an imperceptible veil. In front of me, I could see my own breath misting as the humid air became crisp. My arms started to get goosebumps. This wasn't a shade trick. There was a noticeable physical decrease in temperature that was restricted to the area right around the church. My uneasiness turned into real fear. All of my instincts were telling me to get back in my Jeep and go. However, my inner photographer, which yearned for the ideal evocative snap, was more powerful. I suppressed my fear. I had work to do. I located a window that had a clear view of the interior, but had lost the complete pane of glass. I pulled myself up just enough to look inside. Though oddly preserved, the interior was a shambles. There were still orderly rows of pews, but they were covered in a thick layer of dust. At the far end was a plain wooden pulpit. The absence of graffiti, vandalism, and the typical rubbish and beer cans that plague deserted areas, however, seemed peculiar. It appeared to have been sealed and unopened for 100 years, as well as the depressing sensation inside. It was too much. It was a tangible burden, a sadness so deep that it seemed to seep into my bones. It was the sorrow of 1,000 heartfelt prayers and 100 burials, all contained within those four walls. That's when I heard it. One distinct metallic sound, bong, from the steeple far above me. It was the bell. Instead of the rusty lifeless clank I would have anticipated from a bell that had been left out in the weather for so long, the sound was clear and resonant. It disappeared after echoing through the clearing, leaving a silence that seemed more profound and unwavering than before. My heart pounded against my ribs, and my blood went cold. One bell toll, for whom? It couldn't be moved by the wind. From the outside, there was no rope. I stood motionless. I stood motionless, staring at the steeple with my thoughts racing for a logical answer. Perhaps it had been struck by a bird. There was a fallen branch. However, the music was too beautiful, too purposeful. I ought to have run. Now I am aware of that. My entire body was screaming for me to run. However, I was immobilized, torn between a perverse, ravenous desire and fear. My hands were shaking so much that I was barely able to hold my camera steady when I raised it again. I aimed it at the shadowy window, hoping to catch the origin of this suffocating sadness. The bells started to ring once more, but this time there was more than one lone chime. It was a death knell, a steady, rhythmic ferial dirge. No longer was the music merely in the air. A palpable vibration that appeared to shake my whole soul was inside my head. I felt like I was standing right next to it, since it was so loud, and the atmosphere altered when the bell was tolled. Something else, something active and evil, was now consuming the melancholy I had felt earlier. The sensation of being observed grew more intense, 1,000 times over. They were there when I forced myself to look back into the dusty blackness of the chapel through the vacant window frame. It was initially just a trick of the light, a darker area of darkness in the darkness, but the shadows started to form as my eyes adapted. Dozens of them were figures seated in the pews, though they had distinct shapes: men in vintage suits, women in dark gowns and hats. They were translucent like smoke. Their heads were bowed as though in prayer, and they were all motionless. The fragrance of funereal flowers and decay was oppressive, and the air became unbearably frigid. My throat tightened each breath. I was unable to yell. I was immobile. I was stuck in a nightmare scene. The bells thundering, melancholy tolling persisted. The steady, unhurried beat of dreadful heart. The figurines then started to stir as one. They raised their heads and moved slowly, almost languidly. Only the black, empty spaces where their faces ought to have been were visible to me. They all turned, but not in the direction of the altar or the sermon. They walked over to the window. They turned to face me. The paralysis was broken by that. Finally, a primal scream ripped from my lungs. A savage animal cry of sheer fear. My camera flew out of my hand and landed with a horrible snap as I staggered backward and fell hard onto the wet ground. I didn't give a damn. My eyes remained focused on the window, where the dark figures were now crowded against the aperture, their featureless faces staring out at me, their wordless judgment a physical blow, and I scurried away on my hands and knees, crab walking backward. Now, the sound of the bell being tolled was a physical attack, pushing and chasing me. I stood up and started running. I didn't check back. My lungs burned as I ran through the thick grass, the prickly vines ripping at my jeans. My fingers were lifeless as I fumbled for the handle of my car. The bell rang out a loud, unrelenting declaration of death. At last I jerked the door open, jumped in, and inserted the key into the ignition. I pushed the Jeep into reverse, while frantically spinning the wheel as the engine roared to life. I spun the car around, my headlights swerving frantically into the dusk as my tires ripped over the gravel and grass. My lights illuminated the front of the church for one terrifying second. A tall, thin shadow, a figure darker than the darkness behind it, stood in the doorway of the hefty padlocked doors, which were wide open. The Jeep sped back down the tiny dirt lane. Eyes slammed on the accelerator as I moved away from the church. The ringing of the bell continued to follow me, unbelievably loud. The sound seemed to be blasted straight into my skull, rather than passing through the atmosphere. Branches scraped and screeched down the sides of my car as I drove like a crazy woman. When I finally fishtailed into the fortunate solid asphalt of a county highway, I didn't slow down, and I didn't slow down when I hit the gravel road. The bell continued to ring in my mind for miles before gradually fading away, as though I were finally moving out of its range. Only the sound of my own labored breathing and the thumping of my heart remained when the final echo faded. I shook so badly that my teeth chattered when I pulled over to the side of the road. I remained there for at least an hour till the sky turned pitch black and was dotted with uninterested stars. Ultimately, I took a car to the closest town, located an inexpensive motel, and locked myself in the room. I didn't get any sleep. I always saw them when I closed my eyes. The empty faces of the congregation in the pews turned to face me in silence. I proceeded to the county seat the following day and visited the history archive of the municipal library. As I went through ancient newspapers and town records, my hands continued to shake. Finding it didn't take long. An article from the Georgia Statesman's 1923 issue. The headline said, "St. Giles Tragedy. The funeral fire destroyed the chapel and the attendees." A funeral service for a young girl who had died of a fever was described in the story. A lantern was knocked over during the service, and the ancient, dry wooden church quickly caught fire. The humidity caused the doors to swell shut, jamming them. Inside, nobody got out. More than 30 members of the congregation died in the fire. According to the article, their cries could be heard 4 miles. The church was never reconstructed. As a memorial to the catastrophe, it was merely allowed to decay. The report concluded with a terrifying statement from a local witness. It was the bell that was the worst, he had stated. As they burnt, it continued to ring, as though the church itself was calling out for its own demise. Since then, I haven't travelled the back road. My camera equipment was sold. An irksome whirring of what lurks in the silent, forgotten corners of the earth has taken the place of the joy. I can still hear it sometimes in the middle of the night when the home is quiet. I was reminded of the day I discovered a church that continues to hold services by the sound of a single, feeble bell toll carried by the wind. A church that continues to ring its bells in honor of the deceased. Furthermore, I can say with absolute sure that it was tolling for me on that particular day. Was this story enjoyable to you? Please share your thoughts in the comments section and remember to like this video. Let's go on to our next story now. Robert Green is my name. I've been a long-haul truck driver for the past 25 years, and I'm 49 years old. Through the vast expanse of a windshield, I have witnessed every dawn and sunset our nation has to offer. I have experienced floods in the Mississippi Delta, blizzards in the Rockies, and extreme heat in the Mojave that caused the asphalt to shimmer like water. I believed I had seen everything. I have always believed in what he can see and feel, and I have always been a practical man. Behind me, there were engines, hydraulics, and the substantial weight of 40 tons of freight. I don't think ghosts exist, or I didn't, but I heard something that broke all of that one night on a deserted road in the mountains of Pennsylvania. It was late October, a Tuesday evening. I had made this route 100 times before, and I was transporting a shipment of machine parts from Chicago to Philadelphia. As usual, the schedule was rather strict. In this business, every minute matters. I was crossing into the Allegheny Mountains at around 2 a.m. when the news was broadcast on the CB radio. About 30 miles ahead of me, there was a multi-car crash on the interstate. One of the tankers had capsized. Both directions of the highway were closed. It would be closed for at least 6 months, according to radio chatter, or 7 hours. 6 or 7 hours. That is more than just an annoyance to a trucker. It's a catastrophe. It means a dispatcher who is enraged, a missed delivery window, and a shrinking payment. Along with a dozen other rigs, I pulled over to the shoulder as the radio's irate screech and the flashing lights of distant emergency cars filled the night air. My thoughts were racing as I glanced at my GPS. There was no way to turn back, and I had to continue. The main highway appeared as a blocked red line on my screen, but my eyes followed the old state roads and county roads that wound through the mountains were smaller, fainter lines that spider-webbed off it. I was particularly interested in one route, 984 State Route. It was a twisting to lane route that, based on the map, would take me back out on the interstate around 50 miles later and fully avoid the collision. Yes, it would take more time, but not 7 hours. It appeared to be the ideal shortcut. On the radio, an old-timer cautioned against it. His voice crackled. "That's Black Creek Road. It's a nasty stretch. At night, don't take any rig down there." I sneered. I had fared worse. In the Pacific Northwest, I had traveled on logging roads that were essentially mudslicks on a precipice. A Pennsylvania two-lane paved road. Play for children. I've discovered that pride can be dangerous. I swerved my tractor off the interstate and onto the Route 984 exit ramp, disregarding the warning. The difference was noticeable right away. Cracks appeared in the smooth, wide freeway. The intense blackness, interrupted only by the strong beams of my own headlights, took the place of the dazzling sodium lights. The road wound and curved, ascending more into the hills covered with trees. The temperature dropped. Out here, I was by myself. The amiable truck convoy departed in the distance. It was merely a bad drive for the first 10 miles. I had to struggle to keep my trailer from veering over the center line because the road was narrow and had steep twists. I then reached the bridge. Around a tight bend, it emerged out of nowhere. My headlights revealed a single-lane bridge that crossed a broad, shadowy gulf, a skeletal construction of rushed red iron, with a wooden plank road and a weight limit sign that was so corroded and faded that I couldn't read it. It was ancient and a holdover from another time. With my senses screaming at me, I reduced my rig to a crawl. This was not the type of bridge you drive a 40-ton scimitar across. It was the kind you see in history books. However, what option did I have? The road was too small to make a U-turn. It was hard, especially in the dark, to back up 4 miles on these twisting turns. Going forward was the only option. I inhaled deeply, uttered a brief, unusual prayer, and carefully lowered the cab onto the wooden boards. The weight made the bridge groan. I could feel the entire structure vibrating as my tires rolled over the planks, which moaned and creaked. With my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles were white, I maintained a concentrated gaze on the far side. Below, the ravine was an abyss of utter darkness. I was unable to see the bottom. Driving over the edge of the world was how I felt. My radio, which had been playing a soft country music channel, exploded in a loud, violent burst of static as the cab approached the halfway mark. The noise was so loud that it made me jump. Interference was not all that it was, like 1,000 voices shouting simultaneously. It was a terrible shrieking sound. The bridge's tormented moans were the only sound to break the dead, eerie calm that descended upon the cab. I reached across and smashed the power button. I sensed it at that moment. A powerful, abrupt shock. It wasn't a plank breaking or the vehicle settling. There was a sudden upward thrust from underneath the cab, as though a massive object had collided with the bridge's underside with tremendous power. The entire rig trembled. My heart jumped up and down. Had the bridge's structure collapsed? Was I going to fall into that gulf of blackness? However, the bridge held. I was still going. My brain raced to come up with a reason. The supports were struck by a falling rock from the ravine wall. An earthquake. It was illogical. Then the yelling began. This time it wasn't the radio static, both inside and outside the cab. This sound was audible. It was a human scream, a cry of unadulterated horror and suffering, and the source of it was there under my feet. It was the high, piercing voice of a woman, a sound that should never have to be made by a living person. It sounded like being ripped apart, like a last desperate moment of suffering. My blood became icy. All of my body's hair stood on end. With my foot stuck on the accelerator and the truck moving at a snail's pace, I was immobilized. Men's, women's, and what seemed like children's voices joined the scream, followed by another, and then another, and a chorus of shrieks and wails. They were all resonating through my cab's floor, emanating from the shadows beneath the bridge. Then there was a new sound, a sound that fills my nightmares and haunts my waking hours. A furious, frenetic scratching. The sound sounded metallic, like steel being scraped by fingernails. It was coming just below me from the bridge's underside. Screech, scrape, scrape. The sound came from someone attempting to try to get in by clawing their way up. At last, I was able to escape the paralysis caused by fear. I didn't merely hit the gas pedal. With all my strength, I trampled on it. The tires briefly spun on the wooden planks before gaining traction as the engine roared in protest. The rig stumbled ahead, picking up momentum. The entire bridge trembled and shook as though it were going to collapse. Pitch and volume increased as the screams became more intense. I am being pursued by a symphony of doom that is tearing at me from below. My front wheels struck firm ground first, followed by my back wheels. I'd left the bridge. I didn't slow down. As I pushed the truck down the twisting mountain road, I floored it. I stared at my mirrors. I caught a glimpse of it in my side mirror's image for a split second. Linda Cooper is my name. I'm 30 years old, and I don't only live in the Texas Hill Country. I'm born with it, like the lines on my own palm. I am familiar with its paths. I am aware of how the old live oaks wind into amazing arthritic forms, their branches covered with Spanish moss that resembles the beards of elderly men. I am familiar with the blue bonnet's unfathomable electric blue as they cover the fields in the spring, and how the far-off asphalt dances and shimmers like a mirage with the unrelenting summer heat. These familiar landscapes have always provided me with a profound sense of anchoring comfort. I can't find a sense of belonging anywhere else. But one night, a path I had implicitly trusted and had travelled 100 times chose to play a game with me. The familiar was turned into the dangerous in this merciless game, a game that almost made me lose my mind. It demonstrated to me how even the most familiar route may turn into a nightmare. It was a late summer Friday night, the type of Texas night where the heat of the day lasts long after the sun sets. I was on my way home from the residence of my buddy Sarah. Her family owns a stunning, expansive ranch tucked away in the hills that seems worlds apart from everything else. It takes nearly an hour to travel back to my modest Fredericksburg home. I've traveled this route innumerable times, day and night. There are two options. Gas stations and the odd chain restaurant line the major highway, a broad, well-lit thoroughfare that is quicker but sterile and dull. The picturesque back road, Willow Creek Pass, is a two-lane asphalt ribbon that winds through the area. At night, I virtually always went with the pass, away from the light pollution of even a little town like Fredericksburg. The stars are simply stunning, and the atmosphere was serene and silent. In a thick, sparkling belt that is so bright you could reach out and touch them, they flow across the pitch-black sky. It was the same that evening. with the promise to return soon for another long evening of catching up on her porch. I bid Sarah farewell. With the cab still warm from the day's heat, I got into my reliable truck and headed on to Willow Creek Pass. The moon was low and full, a flawless polished silver dollar that cast a gentle, dreamy radiance over the undulating hills. It created shadows since it was so bright. I opened down my windows, allowing the dry, warm air to rush into the cab with the fresh, earthy smell of cedar and dust. I hummed along to a well-known George Strait song on the radio, feeling completely at ease and deeply satisfied. I passed the old crossroads perhaps 30 minutes or so into the drive. Everyone in the area refers to it as the Dead Oak Crossroads, and it is somewhat of a local landmark. It is the intersection of Willow Creek Pass and an ancient, deserted farm road that has long ago been overrun by dust and weeds, and a huge old oak tree sits like a gloomy monument in the middle of the crossroads. Years ago, it was struck by lightning, a dramatic natural event that suddenly destroyed it, but preserved its enormous frame. It is dead, its naked skeletal branches like the twisted, pleading fingers of a buried giant, reaching up to the sky. I'll admit that it's a touch eerie, but it's also strikingly beautiful in its own right, particularly when framed against a moonlit sky. I made a note of it as I passed the midway point, a well-known landmark on my way home. The truck continued to chew up the miles as I drove. The road meandered, rising and dipping in tandem with the land's soft curves. I went past the Miller Ranch, which had a tall white fence, and then the old stone wall that had fallen and delineated the original German settlement's perimeter. All the sights were familiar. I was approaching to the city. I sensed it. The terrain was starting to level out. The plains that encircle Fredericksburg are where the hills give way. I estimated that I still had 10 or 15 minutes left. Then, against the horizon, my headlights detected a familiar figure up ahead. A huge tree with bare, leafless branches. My stomach gave a weird, perplexed lurch as I approached. The large dead oak tree stood guard in the middle of the intersection. With a deep, perplexed frown, I slowed the truck to a crawl. That was not feasible. Not possible at all. It had been at least 20 minutes since I had passed the intersection. Is it possible that I turned around without noticing? I frantically searched for a rational foothold. Even though I don't drink, I was alert and wide awake. This was a fundamentally confusing error that I could not have made. The truck crunched unnaturally loudly in the unexpected silence as I dragged it over onto the gravel shoulder. Apparently, I got turned around. Perhaps I had turned off into a different, similar-looking ranch road that led back onto the pass. The only justification that made sense was any sense, regardless of how thin it felt. I put the truck in drive, performed a big U-turn, and started back the way I had come, feeling a little silly and more than a little uneasy. I was resolved to listen more intently this time. I kept my eyes fixed on the road, looking for the turnoff I must have missed, the spot where I'd gone wrong, in the blackness on either side. However, nothing was present. The road ran in a single, uninterrupted line. No additional paved roads branching out. No other intersections. In the dark, dormant shapes of the hills. It was only Willow Creek Pass, the same route I had been on the entire time, with barbed wire fences on either side. A chilly, rigid knot of dread emerged after another 15 or 20 minutes of driving, started to grow in the depths of my abdomen. The dead oak tree and the crossroads were ahead, once again lighted by the glaring white beams of my headlights. I had returned. Real fear started to set in this time. Something prickled at the back of my neck, chilly and creeping. This was no error. It was not a bad turn. This was being done by the road itself. I was stuck in a geographical loop, and it was bringing me back here. The once calm and familiar route had turned into a prison. Its soft curves suddenly feel like a cage's bars. This time, I pulled the truck to a stop just beneath the dead oak's skeletal branches in the center of the junction. I destroyed the engine. The ensuing silence was terrible and awful. The noises of the hill country at night, familiar and soothing. The sound of crickets chirping. Paul will hear the distant call of a whip. The thick grass no longer rustled with invisible things. The truck's cab was filled with a thick, dead quiet, that made my ears ring like a vacuum. The world beyond my windows seemed to have vanished. Knowing what I would find, my palm shook as I went for my phone. Of course, no service. The bars were deserted. I launched the GPS app. Right at the junction of Willow Creek Pass and the former farm road was the small blue dot that stood in for my pickup. The road was clearly marked on the map. It continued toward the town. It displayed a clear way back to the road I had just left. I was caught in an impossible, frustrating cycle, yet it showed no signs of it. The digital world said that everything was normal. I could feel my senses telling me it wasn't. I needed to try something new. My father used to say that doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome was the definition of insanity. I was attempting to head east after coming from the west. That was being prevented by the loop. Two more routes, however, led to the junction. The pass ran north and south, intersected by the ancient farm road, which was barely more than a dirt track. There has to be a destination. It was better here than anywhere else. I restarted the truck. The engine's abrupt roar was a welcome, forceful break in the deafening quiet. I inhaled deeply as my heart pounded, pushing at my ribs and swerving the wheel sharply to the right, driving down the gravel road toward the south. As the tires bounced over the sandy, rutted track, the suspension groaned and the vehicle rocked and rattled. At least it took a different turn. It was advancement. It was a decision. For what seemed like an age, I drove. The dirt road continued across pastures illuminated by the moon. With only fence posts and dense grass, the scenery seemed uninteresting. Then I noticed a big tree's shadow against the sky up ahead. A tree reaching for the stars with its twisted, naked branches. Like a stone, my heart dropped into my gut. Like a stone, my heart dropped into my gut. It isn't possible. No, please. However, it was. The dirt road T-boned into a paved road at an abrupt finish. And there it was, the dead oak tree at the junction, its lifeless limbs mocking me in the moonlight. I had returned to the fork in the road. The unattainable image became blurred as tears of frustration and sheer panic welled up in my eyes. In a maze, I was a rat, and every decision, every route, and every last-ditch effort to get away brought me back to the center. As if the tree itself were radioactive, I backed out of the crossroads and threw the truck into reverse. Its dreadful skeleton caught everyone's attention. I gave the North Road a go. I was forced to. I was unable to give up. The outcome was identical. The same terrifying scene was once again illuminated by my headlights after 10 minutes of driving down another dusty, abandoned track. The intersection, the tree, the paved road. For the fourth time, I found myself at the crossroads. I was confined, inexplicably, totally trapped. The will to fight left me. I took a seat in the plastic felt cool on my feverish forehead as I let my head drop forward onto the steering wheel, the center of the intersection. A ragged, raw scream of sheer misery, a sob, tore its way out of my throat. I had no idea what to do. Was this it? Was I destined to drive these 4 highways for the rest of my life, coming back to this one accursed location until my hope and gas ran out? The idea was so horrifying that it almost made me lose my mind. I sobbed frantically for a few minutes before a small spark of rebellion sprang alive inside of me. There was just one thing I could do. I had to return to Sarah's house, the way I had come. It is possible that the loop only operated in one way. Perhaps its purpose was to prevent people from moving forward. It was the single thing I hadn't done, my final chance. After wiping my eyes with my shirt sleeve and taking a deep, trembling breath that made my chest tight, I turned the truck around for the final time. I returned westward along the path I had traveled for what seemed like an eternity, with my knuckles white on the steering wheel and my eyes fixed on the road ahead. I prayed for a change, or a sign that I had broken the loop. Then I noticed it. A figure stood in the center of the road, in full view of my headlights, up ahead. It was there in front of me, its arm up, palm out, as though to tell me to stop or wave me down. Relief was my first thought. There was someone else present, but as I approached, the relief turned into a tremendous perplexity that almost made me sick. She was the one. My heart seemed like it had stopped pounding completely, and my blood ran cold when my headlights showed her more clearly. She was dressed in the same basic blue t-shirt and faded blue pants that I was. I couldn't feel the wind blowing across her face, but she had the same shoulder-length brown hair. Now that I could see her face, it was a mask of complete and utter panic. She was so bare that it hurt to look at the fear in her big eyes. She let out a quiet scream, her mouth wide open. I was the person standing in the road, gesturing for me to come down. It was an exact replica, a reflection of the fear I experienced within myself. The road appeared in front of me as the last protector of the loop, as though it had taken my own anxiety and given it a real form. I have no idea what overcame me at that precise moment. It wasn't a deliberate idea. The need to survive was a basic reptilian instinct. I didn't slow down. I continued. I didn't even ring my horn. My tires screeched on the asphalt in a sound that was fortunately horribly real as I jerked the steering wheel aggressively to the left, and I blew it away. I drove by my frightened twin, my doppelganger. We looked at each other for a moment. I saw a wordless cry of desperation, but I also saw my own fear reflected back at me. A cry for aid, a cry for connection, a cry to stop. I choose to disregard it. As I ran away from myself, I just gazed straight ahead while my foot pressed the accelerator to the ground and the engine roared. I took the chance of taking one quick look in my rearview mirror. The figure has vanished. Not only was the road behind me deserted, but the dead oak tree and the crossroads were also gone. It was a different road. The scenery was different. A softer, more open environment had taken the place of the recognizable cramped hills. I was on a road I had never been on before, but it felt correct. It seemed to be linear. It had the impression of going somewhere. I had a sense of freedom until I noticed the recognizable, reassuring sodium yellow glow of Fredericksburg streetlights on the horizon. I didn't slow down. My tires squealed as I pulled into my driveway and headed straight home. Without even grabbing my bag from the truck, I hurried inside and secured all the windows and doors. My hands were shaking so much that it took me 3 tries to slide the deadbolt home. That night, I didn't get any sleep. I simply waited for the sun to rise while trembling and wrapped in a blanket in a chair in my living room. I no longer used the back roads. I stay on the major highway because of its continuous, comforting lighting, flow of traffic. What transpired that evening is unknown to me. Was there a loop in time? A trick of the terrain? A cautionary tale? All I know is that I met myself on a desolate road in the Texas Hill Country. I also feel a cold, unshakable knowledge that is ingrained in my bones, that I would still be there if I had pulled over, if I had climbed out of my truck and confronted that scared version of myself. Both of us would. We are 2 Linda Coopers that are stuck at a crossroads forever, waiting for the next automobile to arrive, and trying and failing to find our way home. My friends refer to me as a serial empath, and my name is Rachel Adams. I may be overly sensitive to things. I became a nurse for that reason. It's also the reason I stopped a hitchhiker on a desolate section of Highway 26 in Oregon on a gloomy Tuesday in late October. The sky was a deep, somber purple that threatened to rain at any moment, like a fresh bruise. After visiting my sister in Primeville, I was on my way back to Portland. A lengthy, boring drive through towering trees and high desert. Every rational individual abides by the rule, which is that you should never pick up hitchhikers, not on a road this lonely, when the trees appear to lean in and whisper secrets you'd rather not hear. The bleeding heart in my chest, however, overrode all of my warning signs since he appeared so young, so completely soaked, and so wretched. He stood just around a corner. Half-heartedly, he protruded his thumb. With a mop of black wavy hair plastered to his forehead by the rain that had just begun to fall seriously, he couldn't have been more than 20 or 21. He was dressed in jeans that were dark with rainwater and a thin denim jacket, the kind that was more for fashion than for comfort. I found it strange that he didn't have a bag, but I reasoned that perhaps he was a local who was merely attempting to travel a few miles to the next town. He smiled appreciatively, almost like a boy, as I slowed my Prius to a stop on the gravel shoulder. "Need a lift?" I leaned over to open the passenger door and asked. A stream of icy rain was blasted into the automobile by the wind. He said, "Ma'am, you're a lifesaver," in a quiet voice. He sank into the seat, carrying with him the scent of ozone and wet dirt. Pulling his thin jacket closer, he shivered. I had assumed that I would spend the entire night outside. I replied as I turned back into the deserted roadway. "It's no trouble. Where are you going?" "Just up the road a ways," he said, making an ambiguous gesture toward the future. "The ancient Miller property is just over the hill from where I live. At the turn-off, you can drop me off." I assumed my GPS would identify the name, even though I didn't know the area well enough to recognize it. "By the way, my name is Rachel." He rubbed his hands together to create warmth and added, "I'm Daniel." He gave me another of those grateful smiles when I turned up the heat. He had the kind of face you would instantly trust. His eyes had a shockingly brilliant blue color, but they also had an odd sense of distance, as though he was staring at something that was far away from the windshield streaked with rain. For a few minutes, we traveled in pleasant stillness. The only noises were the tires humming on the damp tarmac and the steady beat of the windshield wipers. Even though I don't typically engage in small talk, the silence felt different with him. It was heavy. "So, what brings you out here?" In an attempt to fill the void, I inquired. "Simply put, just trying to get home," he stated. "It's my birthday today. Didn't want to miss the party." "Oh, happy birthday," I said in a joyful tone. "Big plans?" He laughed in a breathy, quiet voice. "My mother is preparing her renowned chocolate cake. Sarah, my girl, is coming over. We will all listen to The Cure's latest album. It will be a pleasant evening." I grinned, but my gut twisted into a tiny knot of bewilderment. The Remedy. Even though I enjoy them, it had been years since they released a really new record. Perhaps he enjoyed old school music. Many children his age were. I said, "That sounds nice. Which record?" "Breakdown. It was released just now. It's excellent. Very dark and lovely," he added with sincere excitement. My stomach knot grew tighter. Breakdown, released in 1989. In 1997, I was born. I gave him a quick look, his hairdo, the cut of his jeans, and his denim jacket. Everything was a little strange. Unlike the Portland youngsters who purposefully dressed like they were from a different era, it wasn't vintage cool. It just looked antiquated, as if he'd been wearing those clothes since they were new. With a slightly strained voice, I managed to remark, "That's a classic. My folks adore the record." Daniel's forehead wrinkled in perplexity. "Your folks. It was released just now. Before, the alarm bells had been silent, but now they were blaring loudly in my thoughts." There was a serious problem. I made an effort to change the topic to something safer. "It sounds like there are a lot of people anticipating your arrival at this celebration." "Yes," he responded, looking off into the distance once more. Landscape. Now that the rain was falling more heavily, the thick forest was being obscured by grey and dark green water. "I'm hoping my father isn't too upset. I ran out of gas a few kilometers back after taking his car without asking." "I know I'm stupid," with a self-deprecating smile. He shook his head. "It will be worthwhile, even though he will ground me for a month." With the easy assurance of a teenager concerned about teenage issues, he spoke. However, the context and the wording were incorrect. My knuckles went white as I clutched the driving wheel. My thoughts were racing as I attempted to put together a justification. Was this a joke? Did he have a mental illness? Or was it another thing, something that was inexplicable? "You know," he replied, his voice growing more solemn, "it's amusing. Today, the world seems different, quicker. It's really silent in your car. You didn't even pull up. And I missed it," I added, hardly raising my voice above a whisper. "It's a hybrid." "A what?" It is powered by gas and electricity. He gazed at the GPS screen and the luminous digital display on the dashboard. His eyes were wide with wonder and bewilderment. Whoa, it resembles a scene from Back to the Future. It's a fantastic film. Did you see it? With my heart thumping against my ribs, I replied, yes, I've witnessed it. His stillness returned, but this time it was electric with unanswered questions and a mounting sense of dread. My fear. He appeared unaware, absorbed in his own world, which was obviously distinct from the one we were traversing. He began to sing a tune that I barely remembered. Heaven was exactly like it. He abruptly pointed ahead and said, "You can let me off just up here. Look at that large oak tree. Just beyond it lies the Miller Farm turnoff. Just over that hill is my residence." I followed his direction. An oak tree was absent. No turnoff was present. Only a level, deserted field stretched into the rainy gloom, bounded by the shadowy woodland line. 4 miles, the road went straight ahead with no intersections. I said, my voice shaking, "There, nothing is there." Daniel's cool, collected manner broke for the first time as he turned to face me. A moment of terror and complete and total bewilderment flashed across his face. "What are you discussing? There it is. I've spent my entire life here." His face pressed against the cool glass of the window. He gazed out. He saw nothing but an empty field while searching for his home and landmarks. A chilly wave of his panic washed over me, and I could feel it beginning to grow. The large red barn on the Miller farm. His voice rose as he stammered, "It's always been there. What location is it?" I honestly said, my throat constricted, "I don't know. Here. I've never seen a farm." His blue eyes were wide and beseeching as he turned to face me. "What's happening? What's different? Where's my home?" I was forced to do it. The question hung between us like a guillotine, and I had to ask it. "Daniel," I stated in a firm yet gentle tone. "Which day is it?" He said right away that it was Tuesday. "Daniel, the date." "When is the entire date?" He gave me a crazy eyes look. "My birthday is October 12th. October 12th, 1985. I felt the words physically strike me. I felt the blood drain from my face 40 years ago. In 1985, despite the heat blazing from the vents, the automobile felt quite cool. The sound of the rain hitting the windshield was like 1,000 tiny fingers tapping to get inside. "Daniel," I said, having to compel myself to speak, "my name is Rachel Adams, and the year is 2025. He merely gazed at me. He looked pale and ghostly in the car's dim light, as the color drained from his face. The amiable boyish charm had vanished, to be replaced by a frightful, unadulterated dread. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His gaze shifted from my face to the dashboard's digital clock and the contemporary GPS map before returning to the outside world, which was no longer his. "No," he muttered. The tone was a denial of the inconceivable fact, a puff of air. "No, it isn't feasible. I was simply strolling along the street. I was heading home," I said. I don't know how, with tears in my eyes. The cosmic horror of his predicament made me cry for him. I don't understand it. His eyes were filled with such deep grief that it felt like a physical weight in the automobile as he turned to face the deserted field. Sarah, my dad, and my mother, her name suffocated him. They're anticipating my arrival. He had stopped talking to me. Whatever horrible twist of fate had swept him out of his time and placed him 40 years into the future. He was addressing the cosmos. He said, "I have to get home," in a flat, emotionless voice. "My birthday is today. It's my birthday, and I have to get home." He went for the door handle before I could respond or even consider stopping him. "No, Daniel, hold on." I slammed the brakes and screamed. However, it was too late. He flung open the door. He didn't appear to notice or care that the car was still traveling, possibly at 30 miles per hour. All he did was turn and go outside into the rain. A thud, a horrible crunch of body hitting asphalt, was what I was expecting to hear. With my eyes pressed shut, I prepared for it, but all I could hear was the wind and rain, followed by the startling silence in the passenger seat next to me. I opened my eyes. In the rearview mirror, I peered. Behind me, the road was deserted. There were no people on the road, but the passenger door was ajar and swinging in the breeze. Not a trace of him. He had just disappeared after getting out of the automobile. With uncontrollable shaking, I pulled over. With the chilly rain soaking me in a matter of seconds, I exited the vehicle and gazed up and down the deserted roadway. Nothing. He had left. He didn't seem to have been there at all. My car's open passenger door and the lingering smell of moist dirt and wet denim were the only signs. I was in shock and drove the rest of the way to Portland. My hands were still shaking when I opened my laptop the following day. Before I typed, my fingers lingered over the keyboard. Daniel is not there. October 12, 1985, Oregon. Instantly, the search results were displayed. An antique microfilm of a yellowed newspaper clipping. It said, "Local teen vanishes on 21st birthday." Daniel Peterson, a well-liked young man, vanished on the eve of his 21st birthday. According to the article, after arguing with his father, he seized the family car and, after it reportedly ran out of gas, was last seen strolling down Highway 26. He was headed home to celebrate his own birthday. No one ever saw him again, and his photo was there, beside the article. The youthful smile, the stunningly clear blue eyes, and the mop of black wavy hair. I took him in my arms. I drove him. However, I was unable to bring him home. There was no longer his house. He had lost his time. I was only a short, terrible diversion on a 40-year quest he has been attempting to finish. I occasionally think of him while I'm driving alone late at night. A ghost of time itself, not of a location. To a yesterday he can never get to. He will always be hitchhiking on a roadway. Partly anticipating, partly fearing, I look at my passenger seat to find him waiting for a ride. Remember to like and leave a comment below if this story made you shiver. Let's go on to another horrifying story. Victor Shaw is my name. I have been a long-haul truck driver for 20 years. I've traveled across the entire nation, experienced every type of weather, and slept in my taxi more often than in a bed. I'm not the type of man who gets carried away by fancy. The road is a useful location. It requires all of your focus. Do you see anything? Yes. Strange things in the fog and odd lighting deceive your weary sight. However, you learn to ignore them. You'll go crazy if you don't. However, what I witnessed one evening in West Virginia's Appalachian Mountains wasn't a result of the lighting. I've been carrying that recollection in my passenger seat ever since it happened. It was early November, and there was no moon. From Charleston, I was transporting a shipment of machine parts to a location east of Roanoke, a 2-lane state roadway that led me through the twisted, dangerous interior of the Rockies. A dense, soupy fog, typical of those hollers, had rolled in. Visibility is reduced to 50 feet in front of your grill. It adheres to the road like a veil. It slows you down and gives you a cramped, small world feeling. There was nothing but the blacktop that twisted endlessly, the white lines on the tarmac, and my headlights. My engine groaned under the effort as I ascended a long, steep incline. Every sound was muffled by the fog, and the air was completely quiet. Around 2 in the morning, when everything seems to be holding its breath. It was 2 a.m. I took a quick look in my rearview mirror, so deep-rooted that it's like breathing. I saw it at that moment. Behind me, a lone headlight pierced the fog, feeble and yellow. Although it wasn't common, seeing anyone else on this road at this hour was remarkable. It's likely that another truck driver is using the same route. However, there was a strange quality to it. The light was too high off the ground for a bike, but it was a single headlight centered like one on an antique motorcycle. The fog briefly cleared as it approached, allowing me to see the shape behind the light. It was a vintage cab-over truck, possibly from the 1950s or 1960s. There were no running lights, no clearance signs, no other lights on, and it was a huge, dark form. Through the mist, I could only see that one faint cyclopean eye glaring at me. At first, I didn't give it much thought. Perhaps an old-timer with a malfunctioning electrical system. I've witnessed worse. After climbing the hill, I began descending, regulating my speed, using my jake brake. The vintage truck trailed after, keeping a constant distance. Then I glanced in my mirror once again as I rounded a steep hairpin. They were 2 in number. Behind it, another truck had fallen in line, just like the first. The same ominous form, the same dim headlight, no additional lighting. I furrowed my brow. It was odd. It was a coincidence. Perhaps they were traveling to a show with a group of vintage trucks. But the time, and that seemed improbable given the weather. I continued to drive, my gaze shifting more often to the mirror. A half-mile section of the road, which ran along the brink of a deeply forested ravine, straightened out. I took another glance in the mirror. My blood froze. Now there were 3, then 4, emerging from the mists like spectral beings. Behind me, a line of these dark, quiet trucks was gathering. Everyone was an exact replica of the previous one. A single sickly yellow beam illuminates an old black taxi. My heart began to beat frantically against my ribs. This was incorrect. It wasn't a club. There was more to this. The hair on the back of my neck was standing on end. Out here, miles away from any town, I was all by myself, with a ghostly procession following me. My hand was shaking when I keyed the microphone on my CB radio. Breaker 1-9, on West Virginia State Road 39. Are there any drivers? I'm in an odd predicament. Return. Not moving. Dead air. Nothing. I took another glance in the mirror. They stretched back into the fog until they were only dim yellow pin pricks of light. And there were now at least a dozen of them. I was being boxed in by them. One of them moved into the lane next to me after pulling out, its dark shape filling my whole driver's side mirror. On my passenger side, another did the same. I was encircled. The quiet was the most horrifying aspect. They should have been audible to me. A dozen massive trucks with their brakes hissing and large diesel engines roaring. However, nothing was present, no sound. My own engine was the only one I could hear. The crunch of my own tires on the pavement was the only sound coming from the road. Like sharks swimming through water, they glided with a quiet, otherworldly ease. Despite being large, solid objects, they were silent. Everything I understood to be true about the world was completely and utterly violated by the laws of physics. I tried to see inside the cab of the truck next to me. My own headlights were reflected back at me from the thick, black glass. I failed to spot a driver. No human silhouette was seen to me. Where a human should have been, there was nothing but blackness. I felt a keen, frigid panic. My years of expertise and training begged me to remain composed and avoid making any rash decisions. However, my gut was telling me something else. Run. I put more pressure on the accelerator. My truck's engine roared in protest as it sped onward, at a very irresponsible speed for this twisting, fog-shrouded road. I sped from 50 to 60, then to 70. They were identical. My speed flawlessly. The 2 vehicles on either side of me remained fixed in place, their lone headlights acting as predators' unwavering eyes. Behind me, the convoy drew closer while keeping their flawless silent order. I applied the brakes in an attempt to slow down. They slowed in eerie synchronization with me. It resembled a funeral procession for the living, a planned dance. I felt like a mouse stuck in a maze with no way out. I wasn't being chased off the road by them. There was no aggression on their part. They simply paced me and led me to a place I didn't want to know. The sense of complete powerlessness was oppressive. My personal journey was no longer in my hands. Playing by their unspoken, incomprehensible norms, I was their prisoner on their path. We drove like this, a silent, spectral caravan slicing through the Appalachian darkness for what seemed like an eternity, but was actually only 10 or 15 minutes. I searched frantically for a logical explanation, a local trucker's prank during a movie production. However, the quiet and its utter impossibility challenged all reason. I then noticed a small paved spot on the side of the road, which was the turn-off for a picturesque overlook up ahead. Desperation ignited a thought in my head. I didn't make a signal. I veered off the highway and into the overlook, my tires screaming as I jerked the wheel hard to the right. The railing was only a few feet away when my truck lurched to a stop. My hands were shaking so much that I could hardly hold onto the steering wheel as I sat there with my chest heaving. I anticipated that they would follow me, turn in, and encircle me as I watched the roadway. However, they didn't. The trucks passed the overlook in silence, one after the other. They didn't go more slowly. They didn't turn to face me with their non-existent heads, with their lone yellow headlights piercing the mist. They simply kept moving on. The individuals to my left, right, and the lengthy queue that had followed me, each a dark, impossible shape against the grey mist. They moved through in a hushed, well-organized procession. Then it just faded as the last one went by. The vehicle didn't disappear into the distance. Its lone headlight winked out of existence as it vanished into the gloom. They were all gone after that. There was nobody on the road. What was left was a different silence. The stillness came naturally. The nighttime silence of the mountains. The stifling, unnatural emptiness of the vehicle's accompanying sound had vanished. Once more, I keyed my CB. Breaker 19. Is there anyone out there? A crackle followed by a crystal clear voice. My wonderful friend, you have a driver here. How old are you? I nearly burst into tears of relief. I was no longer alone. My voice cracked as I told him what I had witnessed. He remained silent for a while. You're in coal country, son, he remarked. These hills have a long history of mining, much tragedy. Some claim that at night, the ghosts of the former strip miners still roam these highways in the trucks they once drove. Since they are ghosts, keep quiet. You simply stay focused on the road and arrive at your destination. Don't stop for no one, either. That night, I didn't get any sleep until the sun rose and drove the fog and the last of the shadows away. I simply sat in that overlook. Since then, I've made a dozen trips down that road, but only during the day. I know the trucks are there, but I've never seen them again. Awaiting the arrival of fog, in the middle of the night, waiting for a lone driver, a silent caravan traveling into the shadowy interior of the mountains, carrying a load of spirits for all eternity. Carrying a load of spirits for all eternity. You can call me Monica Torres. My car serves as my office because I work as a sales representative for a pharmaceutical firm, fueled by lousy coffee and the strain of quarterly quotas. I spend my life chasing appointments down endless highways. I take great satisfaction in my ability to plan ahead and have a clear sense of direction. I'm not the type to get lost easily. However, I didn't simply get lost one wet night in the vast, abandoned back country of upstate New York. I wandered into an area where time itself had become disoriented. I had a meeting. My GPS, which is usually my reliable guide, decided to have a mental breakdown in a small town had never heard of. I found myself traveling down a sequence of dim, twisting county roads that seemed to go back on themselves. The world outside my windshield became a fuzzy abstract picture due to the unrelenting rain, which was a solid sheet of water. An hour ago, my cell service had stopped working. The last insult followed. The light for low gasoline blinked on. A small beacon of doom, amber in color. Cold, piercing panic started to seep in. I had no phone, no map, and my automobile was getting thirstier and thirstier. I was in the middle of nowhere. There was nobody on the road. It had been miles since I'd seen another vehicle. I managed to see through the flood just as I was about to pull over and accept a sleepless night in my car. On the horizon, a warm, gentle radiance. The illumination solidified into a neon sign as I approached. It was vintage, with buzzing, flickering cursive letters. The text said, "The Haven Diner, always open." I felt such a wave of relief that I nearly passed out. A restaurant, definitely a haven. It had the appearance of something from the 1950s. In the midst of a dark, wet forest, a traditional red and silver structure fell. For miles, it was the sole indication of life. There was only one other car in the gravel parking lot when I pulled in. A shabby old pickup truck that appeared to have been inactive for 10 years. As soon as I entered, the sound of the rain stopped and was replaced by an odd, profound silence. It wasn't deserted. Other customers were present. At the counter, a man wearing a faded flannel shirt was gazing into a coffee mug. A young couple sat at a window-facing booth, holding hands and gazing out at the rain without saying anything. However, there was no clatter of silverware, no jukebox music, and no conversation. There was simply a faint, hardly inaudible hum, like the buzz of old fluorescent lights. From behind the counter came a waiter. She was older, her hair done up in a tidy bun, her features gentle and weary. Like the cafe itself, she wore a pale pink, starched uniform that looked like it belonged in another time period. With a quiet, raspy voice, as though she hadn't used it in a long time, she said, "Table for one, honey." "Yes, please," I said as I shook my coat to get the rain off it. "And I'm so glad you're open. My car is running on fumes." She brought me to a booth after giving me a little melancholy smile. She stated, "We're always open." I sank onto the red vinyl seat like it was a confession. The diner felt maintained, like a museum exhibit, despite its impeccable cleanliness, with the chrome shining and the checkerboard floor perfect. For comfort food on a difficult night, I ordered a slice of apple pie and a black coffee. With a lazy, almost listless elegance, the waitress nodded and slid back to the counter. It was as if everyone in the cafe were trudging through invisible sludge. The pie was unexpectedly delicious, and the coffee was strong and steaming. The diner's warmth began to soak into my bones as I began to unwind. In the hopes of catching a stray bar of service, I took out my phone. Nothing. I looked at the clock, which was 1:17 a.m. Then the large round clock on the wall behind the counter caught my attention next. It had a sweeping second hand and was a traditional diner clock. It read 1:17 a.m. as well. Savoring the break from the storm, I ate my pie gently. I observed the other customers. The man behind the counter stared at his coffee and never moved. The somber tableau of the couple beside the window did not change. I attributed it to the peculiar, drowsy atmosphere of a late-night diner in the middle of nowhere, even if it seemed odd. After I finished my coffee, the waitress came back with the pot. "More honey, please," I called out. I decided as she filled my mug again. I was worn out. The precipitation, my automobile was still on empty, and it was still coming down. "Are you aware if there is a petrol station in the area?" The coffee pot was hovering over my cup when the waitress hesitated. Her lips once more met that sorrowful grin. "The closest one is around 30 miles away, but it's closed, not going to open until 7. My heart fell. "And I could buy or borrow your gas can if you don't have one." Slowly, she shook her head. "I'm sorry, honey, we don't." With a sigh, stroking my wet hair with my hand, I appeared to be stranded here for some time. To take advantage of the circumstance, I made the decision to finish some work. Naturally, my laptop had no Wi-Fi when I took it out. I made do with typing up reports and rearranging certain files. The steady click of the keys, a reassuring sound in the otherwise quiet cafe, distracted me from my task. My back hurt as I stretched after what seemed like an hour or more. I had to go to the bathroom. Out of habit, I took another look at the wall clock as I got up. My blood became icy. The time was still 1:17 a.m. the minute, and our hands weren't the only ones. Pointing straight at the 12, the red second hand, which ought to have been moving smoothly across the face, was frozen. My mind refused to comprehend what I was seeing as I stood there looking at it. It must be broken. There was no other reasonable explanation. An antique diner with a broken clock. Suddenly my hands were unsteady, and I scrambled for my phone. I woke up the screen by pressing the side button. My lock screen's blazing digits read 17A. A feeling of vertigo and nausea swept across me. With my heart thumping my ribs, I staggered back into the booth. This was not feasible. The network sets the clock on my phone. It's always right. I checked my watch. A straightforward analog Timex. The hands were motionless and pointing at 117. I surveyed the diner. There had been no change. The pair beside the window and the man at the counter were standing exactly where I had been when I first arrived. They had remained still. They weren't sluggish. They froze. The only thing still flowing through time in this area was me. The waitress was using a white cloth to polish a glass while she stood behind the counter. Her actions, however, were deceptive. She was repeatedly massaging the same region in a tiny, never-ending loop of action. Her eyes met mine as she raised her head, and I noticed something else in them, like an old soul's deep fatigue. I feel sorry. Without making any noise with her feet on the checkered floor, she drifted closer to my table. Her voice, as she drew forward, was a whisper, low and urgent. Her eyes begged me. "Time gets sticky here, honey," she whispered. "It's a quiet place to rest, too silent. People occasionally enter and settle in. For a spell, they sit, and the magic never breaks. You want to leave. You should leave right away to avoid becoming stranded as well." My numbness was broken by the sheer unfathomable anguish of her words, like the man at the counter who is stuck there all the time, staring at a coffee cup that never cools, like the couple beside the window who are forever stuck in one silent moment of love. I didn't require two reminders. With my hands shaking so much that I could hardly hold it, I tossed a $20 bill down the table. I hurried out of the booth after grabbing my laptop and coat. I looked back as I hurried to the door. The waitress continued to observe me with that intensely dejected expression on her face. Neither the pair in the booth nor the man at the counter had moved. In a diorama of a life that had come to an end, they were statues. I exploded into the darkness. The rain had ceased. It had pure, cool air. I scrambled to find my keys. My heart feels like it might burst from my chest. I got into my car, prayed, and stuck the key in the ignition. After coughing and sputtering, the engine miraculously turned over. I didn't ask any questions. With my tires shrieking in protest, I put the car into reverse, pulled out of the gravel lot, and sped onto the highway. I took the chance of looking in my rearview mirror as I sped up. I caught sight of the neon sign for the diner, glowing warm and inviting. After that, I watched it flicker once, twice, and then go out, leaving the area where the diner had been completely dark. It had disappeared, not merely turned off. For what seemed like hours, I drove, my foot against the ground. After a while, my phone rang. There had been an SMS message. With a shaky body, I stopped. I received service once more. I glanced at the screen's time. The time was 3:42 a.m. once more. Time was passing. I looked at my gasoline gauge. Full was indicated by the needle. That diner was never found again. I looked at maps. I've examined satellite photos of the region I believe to be my location. Nothing is there. Forest for miles and miles. It was a location that no map can show. A sliver of peace in a constantly shifting world. A refuge for the outcasts. A place where you can lay in peace eternally. It still gives me nightmares. I'm back in that booth in my dream. The pie is sweet, the coffee is steaming, and the wall clock is showing 117. Furthermore, the second hand is motionless. 17. Furthermore, the second hand is motionless. Eddie Johnson is my name. My universe has been framed by a windshield and measured in miles for the past 15 of my 53 years. I work as an overnight delivery driver, a contemporary mule skinner who transports perishable items over the wide, deserted desert of Nevada in a refrigerated box truck, serving the smaller, more remote villages dotted across the desert like lone outposts. My route leads me from the neon brilliance of Reno into the primordial blackness of the Great Basin. It's not only my work shift at night, it is my co-pilot and my constant companion. There are things out there that people who live in the daytime will never see. Showers of meteors that silently burst the sky with dazzling fire. Odd geometric lights that dance and disappear from far-off military locations. And the ghostly, blazing eyes of animals, such as mountain lions, coyotes, and owls, that blaze like embers by the side of the road before vanishing once again into the sagebush. I'm a man who enjoys being by himself. I have reconciled myself with the gloom. I believed that I was familiar with the desert's tricks, illusions, and mirages. However, the desert revealed a different kind of darkness to me one night on a section of Highway 50 that is so incredibly desolate that it is known as the loneliest route in America. It was a living darkness, a ravenous blackness. The night began with a strong sensation of sameness, much like any other. About 3 hours into my run, the truck's large diesel engine began to hum its constant, repetitive tune. With a comforting, familiar thrum, the refrigeration unit behind the cab turned on and off. In the vast, quiet wilderness, a rolling haven of humming equipment and chilly, air-conditioned air, I maintained a constant speed of 65 miles per hour, which is both the legal limit and the optimal fuel economy. The stars had to do the heavy job, and the moon was only a savage sliver, a Cheshire cat smile that provided little light. And they did. It seemed as though you could sink into the deep, transparent canopy of diamond dust that was the sky indefinitely. Outside my taxi, the world was a stark, black and grey, minimalist study. My headlight's strong throw created a white tunnel in the shadows, shedding light on the roads and ending asphalt ribbon and the sagebrush's ghostly, pallid forms. Driving through such a void induces a dreamy, nearly meditative state. Your mind unravels the past, present, and future. In the silent cab, everything seems to float. Only you, the engine, and the road ahead are involved. A looping tape of darkness and desolation. I nearly missed the first indication that something was amiss since it was so subtle. A tiny irregularity at the very border of my headlight beams caused a visual glitch. On the road's right shoulder, I saw an odd collection of blackness. It wasn't your typical light to dark soft-edged fading. This area was made up of there was a blackness that looked more profound, more absolute, as if the light itself were being drowned out. I rubbed the back of my hand across my weary eyes and blinked vigorously. Things are simple to see out here. The mind can begin to conjure images in the dark for a few hours of travel because fatigue are the potent hallucinogen. I chalked it up to that just a tired mind's trick. With a familiar stab of bitterness, I took a long sip of my lukewarm coffee from the thermos wedged in the console. I turned my attention back to the road and the white lines that guided me through the empty space. However, the black spot persisted. It appeared to linger on the edge of my field of view, a floater on the world's eyeball. It was exactly where my headlight's cone gave way to the darkness, a space where the soft grey of the desert floor was just gone, and the starlight didn't seem to reflect. It was eerie. I've made hundreds of trips down this route. I am familiar with the subtleties of each season, moon phase, and the way the shadows dance on the rocks. This was novel. This was incorrect. My uneasiness increased with each mile as I continued to drive. I felt a chill creep down my back. The area of darkness appeared to be following me. It wasn't a cloud-cast shadow. The sky was clear. Unlike an area of dark rock or a lava field, it was not a natural feature. I was moving with it. I had the impression that it was a thing in and of itself, lurking just out of my line of sight and far enough away to be vague. My curiosity overcame me, accompanied by an increasing sense of fear. I eased my foot off the pedal and allowed the large truck to slow from 65 to 50 in an attempt to get a better look at it. I looked into the darkness, attempting to make sense of the shape. The darkness seems to respond to my attention as I did. Like a bead of mercury, it came together and coalesced, getting smaller but sharper. It was no longer an ill-defined patch. On the gravel shoulder of the road, there was a low, crouched blot of pure black that had a specific shape. My heart started to beat a little quicker, fluttering nervously in my chest. A beast, a desert bighorn sheep or a stray cow. The number, it was too gloomy. Even the darkest animal hide has a shine, a highlight, and some light reflection. Nothing was represented by this. It appeared as though someone had sliced a hole in the world's fabric with scissors. A fragment of the emptiness fell to the desert floor. I said out loud, "Stop it, Eddie," in a thin, odd voice in the taxi. "You're worn out. Your thoughts are deceiving you." As I depressed the accelerator, the huge truck's engine groaned as it attempted to restart. I had a straightforward plan. Forget about it and move on from whatever it was. The shape on the side of the road shifted as the vehicle accelerated. I had never seen an animal hurry, skulk, or bound away like that. The flow resembled an ink spill on a table that was tilted. It pulled away from the shoulder, and slid onto the paved surface, slipping with an eerie smoothness straight into my truck's path. I shouted, a quick, brief bark expressing alarm and surprise. My foot jammed down on the brake pedal out of pure instinct. The huge truck started to slow down as the air brakes hissed loudly, but it was too late. I intended to strike it. I prepared myself for the crunch of bone and flesh, the horrible thud of impact. However, the shadow creature did an impossible thing right before the hit. It jumped. The movement was boneless, smooth, and completely silent, an arc of utter blackness against the night sky covered in stars. Before it hit the wide, flat hood of my truck with a gentle, nauseating thump, it appeared to float in midair for a terrifying, endless second. I felt it more than I heard it, even though it wasn't a big sound, vibrating through the truck's structure, up the steering column, and onto my death-grip-locked hands on the wheel. It was a dull, hard hit. My mind refused to grasp the information my eyes were sending it, so I just looked in fear and bewilderment. The shadow was on the hood of my truck. The shape was no longer hazy. In front of my eyes, it was forming, coming together, and taking on shape and substance. It like observing a pool of tar thicken and bubble in the sunlight. It rose, bringing its mass inward to create a figure that was slumped and brooding, somewhat humanoid, the size of a young child or a large dog. It lacked any distinguishable limbs, eyes, mouth, or features. It was merely a sculpture of night itself, a three-dimensional emptiness. My headlight's strong beams appeared to distort and warp around it, failing to break through its utter darkness that devours light. In the driver's seat, I was motionless, a statue of fear. A yailing, frantic jumble of panic and denial filled my consciousness. The truck continued to speed along the highway at 60 miles per hour, and there was this silent, unwanted hitchhiker on my hood. Then it started moving. It didn't, in the traditional sense, walk or crawl. It started to ascend the mild incline of my hood in the direction of the windshield, spreading and contracting like a sticky liquid. Slowly, deliberately, with a terrible intent, it moved. It was headed my way. Through the windshield's thick glass, I could sense a chill, a deep chill that was unrelated to the weather outdoors. It was the icy chill of nothingness, the utter zero of a realm devoid of warmth, light, and life. My engines and the refrigeration unit's reassuring hum began to wane. The world outside my taxi dissolves into a blurry, irrelevant scene. My whole universe, my whole life was now limited to this impossibly large thing that was crawling in my direction. When it got to the bottom of the windshield, it started to drag itself up against gravity, like a drop of black ink on parchment. Its form expanded as it spread out and flattened on the glass. It was obscuring my vision, transforming the outer world into a suffocating, featureless black. Now I could get a close-up look at its texture. It wasn't easy. Like 1,000 little shadows writhing and twisting over each other within the greater form, the surface was roiling, shifting, and chaotic. The whole thing was hypnotically terrifying. The immobility had been experiencing was eventually broken by a primordial horror that I had never experienced in my 53 years of life. A deep, primal scream that is full of my throat ripped with panic. With all my strength, I applied the brakes, causing my legs to shake from the impact. The tires protested as they struggled for traction on the icy tarmac, creating long black lines on the desolate roadway as the truck bucked and shrieked. It knocked the wind out of me and anything else in the cab that wasn't strapped down, and the seatbelt dug hard into my chest. A bag of chips, my logbook, and my thermos all flew against the dashboard. The shadow was affected by the abrupt severe deceleration. Its purchase on the glass was lost. It moved slowly at first, then more quickly, leaving a black smear across the hood, off the front of the vehicle, and down the windshield. For a brief moment, I saw it in my spotlights as it struck the road, not as a shape, but as a shapeless black pool that instantly dissipated, its edges tearing like smoke before disappearing into the nighttime darkness of the desert. Angled across both lanes of the deserted highway, the vehicle skidded to a stop. The violent maneuver had deprived the engine of gasoline, causing it to stall. The ensuing silence was profound, terrible, and overwhelming. My body trembled violently from the adrenaline rush. I sat there hyperventilating. My eyes were forced shut and my forehead was crushed against the steering wheel. On the inside of my eyelids, however, was the afterimage of that featureless, crawling blackness. Time had lost all significance after what might have been a minute or an hour. At last, I mustered the strength to move. I could hardly insert the key into the ignition because my hands were shaking so much. My faithful mechanical companion, the engine, roared back to life when I turned it. I didn't hold out. I didn't go outside to look for any damage. After straightening out the truck, I took on the road. I didn't drive reasonably fast. I pressed the accelerator to the floor and drove that truck as fast as it will go. My eyes were wide as I looked for any movement or indication of that strange blackness in the shadows on either side of the road. I didn't check myself in the mirror. I didn't want to find out whether I was being followed. Before I could see the heavenly, lovely, man-made lights of a tiny town on the horizon, I drove like a man possessed for almost an hour, the engine screaming. The first all-night gas station's parking lot was where I pulled in. I noticed how the canopy's bright, humming fluorescent lights resembled the sun's cozy, protective embrace. With my body still trembling and my legs wobbly and unstable, I staggered out of the taxi. After 15 years of driving, I did something I had never done before. With my heart still racing, I made my way to the front of my truck and touched the hood and windshield where the object had been. The metal and glass surfaces had an odd, almost oily, filmy quality and were colder than the surrounding spaces, residue that my fingers removed. It had a subtle scent of damp, chilly earth and ozone. It was authentic. It had been authentic. Since that night, I have changed. I no longer have a silent, reflective friend in the darkness. There is a presence. It has texture and weight. It feels like every shade on the road is a bit too deep. My vision is a little too absolute in every dark place. I continue to go the same path. Men must earn a living. However, I currently do it with a can of powerful road flares resting on the passenger seat behind me, and a hard, tight knot of anxiety in my stomach. I now know that the sun burns away some things in the wide voids of the desert. Only in the dark, lonely hours of the night, when everyone else is asleep, do things come out, and the darkness has a life of its own. I know it with a surety that shakes me to my core, and I watched it crawl along a desolate road in the middle of nowhere. George Miller is my name. I am a certified public accountant, and I am 51 years old. By design, my existence is a stronghold composed of spreadsheets, logical progressions, accounts that must and always do balance, and numbers. I believe in orderly norms and the reassuring, unquestionable regularity of a well-thought-out journey. I live in a world where straight lines are the cause and effect of debits and credits, and precise responses. That's why it's so hard to reconcile what happened to me on a cool Saturday in October in the bizarre sandy wilderness of the New Jersey Pine Barrens with the reality I believe to be true. I made a straightforward, state-approved diversion from my intended path. By doing this, I drove directly out of my orderly universe and into a place where logic was completely broken and the accounts would never balance. The first true bite of fall was in the air on this brisk Saturday in October. I was heading out to Atlantic City for a weekend accounting conference in my immaculately kept car. I had made the drive 100 times. The shot down the Atlantic City Expressway was straight and predictable. It was meant to be simple. However, the traffic slowed to a crawl and then stopped entirely about halfway there as the deep green of the pines finally replaced the urban sprawl of Philadelphia's suburbs. A wave of red brake lights stretched 4 miles in front of me. A river of annoyance cursed by some invisible barrier. I'm not a man of patience. In my line of work, patience is frequently a liability. My annoyance turned into a well-known restless rage. There 20 minutes of going nowhere and the motor idling with a dull, inefficient hum. I checked the traffic app on my phone after taking it out. A serious mishap. The highway was closed in both directions due to a multi-vehicle collision. 4 hours was the estimated clearance time. 4 hours. It was unbearable to think of being a prisoner in a linear parking lot, sitting in this metal box. My fingers traced the fainter, thinner lines that spider-webbed off the bright red of the stopped road as I zoomed in on the map. And there it was, a network of county roads, a believable-looking detour that cut across the Pine Barrens' expansive green space. The software estimated that it would prolong my trip by around 40 minutes. 40 minutes as opposed to 4 hours. There was absolutely no choice. It was a sensible necessity. I grabbed the automobile, rolled happily onto the ramp at the next exit before plunging into the trees. An odd anachronistic sight is the Pine Barrens. Sugar sand soil, black cedar-stained rivers, and a million acres of dense scrubby pine forest make up this area. A forest island stranded in the center of the nation's most populous state. Turning off the major roads gives you the impression that you have traveled through an imperceptible barrier into another era. The silence becomes unnatural. A canopy of pine needles blocks out the light, turning the once bright open sky into a gloomy, dull green, and a deep, almost terrifying sense of loneliness hits you right away. It was fine for the first several miles. Even though the road was tiny and cracked, it was paved, and I was moving quickly. Seeing the other unfortunate people still stuck on the motorway gave me a smug sense of triumph. I then noticed the sign. It was a bright, almost obscenely happy orange diamond with an arrow pointing down a narrower, dirt road with the words detour written in stark black letters. It turned out that the county route that my GPS had directed me to follow was also closed. I let out a harsh, frustrated groan. A diversion from a diversion. I obeyed the sign, though I was aware of the irony. The state's requirements, I assumed they were handling things. Their actions were well known. The new road was merely a broad, densely populated stretch of sand. This was not what my low-profile tires and smart German sedan were designed for. Before catching, the tires made a faint whining sound as they battled for hold. On each side, the tall, thin pines closed in, their lower branches pointed and brittle, making a scratching sound like fingernails on a chalkboard as they scraped against my windows. There was complete silence, not simply quiet, but a profound, resonant absence of sound. There was only the quiet, nervous hum of my engine and the gentle, eerie crunch of sand beneath my tires. No insect buzz, no bird music. My digital link to the sensible world, my GPS, eventually failed. When the screen wavered, the serene female voice said, "G-signal lost." The map vanished, revealing me in an ocean of monotonous, pixelated green. The car's symbol appears as a lone blinking arrow. My initial smugness turned into a low-grade anxiousness as I drove for what seemed like 20 minutes, my knuckles white on the driving wheel. Without any apparent reason, the sandy trail wound unturned. Then I noticed a second detour sign, a similar orange diamond with an arrow directing me to a smaller, more unkempt path. I whispered, "This is getting ridiculous," to the car that was empty. However, what option did I have? Now I was too far gone to go back. It seemed impossible to imagine traversing these sandy roads in reverse. I went with it. The arrow. The jungle grew more sinister and ominous. The trunks of the trees were now black and thin, and the sandy road was covered in fallen branches and a thick carpet of brown pine needles, which crunched noisily beneath my tires. Since leaving the paved road, I hadn't seen another vehicle, a house, or any indication of human life. My stomach started to churn with a primordial uneasiness, an instinct I hadn't experienced since I was a kid, fearing the dark. This no longer felt like a diversion controlled by the state. I had the impression that I was being guided somewhere, enticed. The road reached a clear bifurcation after yet another lengthy stretch of nervous driving. Another detour sign was there, jammed into the sandy ground between the two tracks that diverged. This one, however, was unique. It was ancient. Pale, sickly yellow had replaced the bright orange. The wood was dark with age and moisture, fractured and worn. The black strokes on the arrow that led me down the left fork were sloppy and leaking. With my foot hovering over the brake, I paused. This was really, really bad. The right branch was choked with prickly shrubs and was nearly impassable due to the heavy overgrowth. The path that was more obvious was the left fork. I turned left, reluctantly but rationally. As soon as I turned the corner, the forest grew strangely silent. I was shocked to discover that I was no longer even able to hear my own engine. I took one look at the tachometer. At 2000 p.m., the needle was stable. The vehicle was in motion. The sound had simply vanished, yet it was still moving forward. The suffocating, terrible stillness of the pines had engulfed it. The damp coldness that permeated the car's vents made the air grow chilly, and I knew that I was lost with a conviction that defied reason and became as solid as ice in my bones. Not simply lost in location, but lost in essence. I was not being led out by these signs. I was being led around in circles by them. They were teasing me. Although time had started to feel supple and pointless, I drove for what must have been an additional hour. When I got off the freeway, my gas gauge was almost full, but now it was barely above empty. The speed at which the needle descended seemed impossible. I started to feel panic, a cold, creeping dread that neither reason nor spreadsheets could stop. Without a phone, GPS, or petrol, I was about to be left stranded in the middle of this eerie, silent forest. Black dread was on the verge of taking grip, too. Something caught my eye up ahead. There was a figure, a form, by the roadside. I felt a rush of relief so strong it made me feel lightheaded. Someone else, a park ranger, a local, anybody who could help me find my way back to the realm of cell service and paved roads. With a desperate, naive hope in my heart, I sped up. The hope turned to bewilderment as I approached, and then to pure, unadulterated fear. It wasn't a human. It was another of those ancient, weathered detour signs, and leaning against it like a scarecrow on exhibit. It was an ugly, grotesque thing, a folk art nightmare put together out of the wood's debris. It was constructed from old burlap sacks, clearly filled with dry pine needles and leaves. It was deformed and bulging. It wore a pair of farmer's overalls that were ragged and soiled with muck. Its arms, which were constructed of branches that had been twisted and stripped of their bark, were extended as though to greet or warn. However, it was the head that caused me to apply the brakes forcefully, causing the car to skid to a stop in the soft sand. It was an uneven burlap bag with a piece of rough twine tied off at the neck, and someone had sketched a face in what appeared to be black paint or charcoal on it, a broad stitched-on smile that extended from one side of the head to the other, and to black empty circles for eyes. It was a wealth of irrational evil joy. In the middle of the sandy track, I sat with my car idling silently while my heart pounded painfully and frantically against my ribs. About 50 feet separated me from it. Some local kids may have pulled a terrible joke or prank on us. My headlights, which had turned on automatically in the dark of the forest, flickered just as I was ready to put the car in reverse and drive as quickly as possible away from this hideous effigy. Off, then back on. I thought I saw it move in that moment of complete darkness. One of its arms, which resembled branches, twitched slightly. I told myself it was a trick of the light and forced my eyes tight. My fearful mind is playing tricks on me. Once again, the headlights turned on steadily. It was precisely where the scarecrow had been. From the shadows, its stitched-on smile mocks me. In the quiet automobile, my voice was a weak, reedy whisper as I drew a hesitant breath. "George, get your act together. It's only a doll. It's merely a dumb doll." With my foot shaking on the pedal, I shifted the car into drive. I made the decision to simply put it behind me, to keep going, to go on. As if in a trance, I couldn't take my eyes off the scarecrow as I rolled slowly past it. Then it took place. The placard, the scarecrow's head, and the uneven burlap were all level with my automobile as it approached. Slowly, the sack rotated with its crazy smile. The motion was not fluid. It felt stiff and jerky, and there was the slight, dry rustle of pine needles and straw moving inside the sack. It tracked the motion of my car by turning its head on its string neck. Its blank, black-painted eyes gazed right into mine. I let out a yell. I didn't identify the sound as coming from me. It was an unadulterated primal scream of unadulterated fear. A noise tore from the most primitive, deepest recesses of my mind. I pushed the accelerator as hard as I could. The tires spun pointlessly in the sand for a horrifying moment before gaining traction as the engine, which was at last audible again, roared to life. The vehicle sped ahead. The road no longer mattered to me. The signs meant nothing to me. I simply had to leave. I turned off the sandy road and went straight into the thick pine forest. The world of roads and regulations had vanished. Branches around my car's sides hissed and scratched like skeletal arms. It was a sound, fortunately terrifyingly genuine. A big limb crashed into my windshield. The impact shuddered through the frame of the car, not breaking through. The glass exploded into a web of cracks. I didn't slow down. With only blind, screaming panic to guide me, I drove like a lunatic, swerving into the trees. How long I drove that way is unknown to me. It might have been an hour or just a few minutes. Brown tree trunks, green pine needles, and the shattered crystalline picture through my smashed windshield made up my universe, which was a sickening, disorganized muddle. Then all of a sudden I exploded out of the trees and onto gorgeous, wonderful asphalt. I had smashed onto the broad asphalt shoulder of a large highway, crashing through the trees. I applied the brakes hard, causing my vehicle to rock violently to a halt. My teeth were chattering and I was trembling so badly that I was having trouble breathing. I glanced around, confused. Automobiles were rushing by at 70 miles per hour, their drivers glancing at my broken vehicle inquisitively. I turned to face the trees from which I had just come. The track was not sandy. No signs of a detour were present. The forest seemed to have closed the entrance behind me, leaving only a thick, impenetrable wall of pine trees. Once again, I found myself on the Atlantic City Expressway. I could see the red and blue lights of the accident I had fought to avoid hours before flashing up ahead in the distance. Through a location that shouldn't exist, I had driven in a circle a terrible, impossible loop and found myself back where I had begun. After I got the car back on the road, I pulled into the traffic, which was now moving. My heart felt like it was about to beat its way out of my chest as I sat there with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The gas gauge caught my attention. The needle was fully extended. I didn't attend the conference. I drove directly home after taking the next exit. The trip was a haze of surprise and incredulity. The following week, I sold the automobile. The spiderweb of cracks in the windshield and the deep, angry scratches carved into its sides were too much for me to look at. They served as tangible, physical reminders of an intangible, non-physical location. A location where the regulations of the world collapsed. I no longer take detours. I stay on the primary paths that lead to the world of balanced accounts, logic, and statistics. But occasionally, when I close my eyes and the home is silent late at night, I can still see it. In the quiet, waiting woods of the Pine Barrens, a rudimentary scarecrow with a stitched-on smile gently rotates its head. I no longer comprehend the reality, being audited by a silent accountant. Linda Cooper is my name. I'm 30 years old, and I don't only live in the Texas Hill Country. I'm born with it. I like the lines on my own palm. I am familiar with its paths. I am aware of how the old live oaks wind into amazing arthritic forms, their branches covered with Spanish moss that resembles the beards of elderly men. I am familiar with the bluebonnet's unfathomable electric blue as they cover the fields in the spring, and how the far-off asphalt dances and shimmers like a mirage, the unrelenting summer heat. These familiar landscapes have always provided me with a profound sense of anchoring comfort. I can't find a sense of belonging anywhere else. But one night, a path I had implicitly trusted and had travelled 100 times chose to play a game with me. I almost lost my sanity playing this brutal game that turned the familiar into the terrifying. It demonstrated to me how even the most familiar route may turn into a nightmare. It was a late summer Friday night, the type of Texas night where the heat of the day lasts long after the sun sets. I was on my way home from the residence of my buddy Sarah. Her family owns a stunning, expansive ranch tucked away in the hills that seems worlds apart from everything else. It takes nearly an hour to travel back to my modest Fredericksburg home. I've traveled this route innumerable times, day and night. There are two options. Gas stations and the odd chain restaurant line the major highway. Abroad, well-lit thoroughfare that is quicker but sterile and dull. The picturesque back road, Willow Creek Pass, is a 2-lane asphalt ribbon that winds through the area. At night, I virtually always went with the pass. The stars were out there, far from the light, and it was excruciatingly quiet. Even a little town like Fredericksburg is breathtakingly polluted, in a thick, sparkling belt that is so bright you could reach out and touch them. They flow across the pitch-black sky. It was the same that evening, with the promise to return soon for another long evening of catching up on her porch. I bid Sarah farewell. With the cab still warm from the day's heat, I got into my reliable truck and headed on to Willow Creek Pass, a flawlessly polished silver dollar. The moon was low and full in the sky, casting a gentle, ethereal radiance over the undulating hills. It created shadows since it was so bright. I opened down my windows, allowing the dry, warm air to rush into the cab with the fresh, earthy smell of cedar and dust. I hummed along to a well-known George Strait song on the radio, feeling completely at ease and deeply satisfied. Perhaps midway through the drive I passed the ancient crossroads after 30 minutes. Everyone in the area refers to it as the Dead Oak Crossroads, and it is somewhat of a local landmark. It is the intersection of Willow Creek Pass and an ancient, deserted farm road that has long ago been overrun by dust and weeds, and a huge old oak tree sits like a gloomy monument in the middle of the crossroads. Years ago, lightning struck it. It was quickly murdered by a violent act of nature, but its enormous frame remained intact. It is dead, its naked skeletal branches like the twisted, pleading fingers of a buried giant reaching up to the sky. I'll agree that it's a touch eerie, but moreover, it is strikingly lovely in its own right, particularly when framed against a moonlit sky. As I passed a well-known landmark, my way home, I took note. The midway point. The truck continued to chew up the miles as I drove. The road meandered, rising and dipping in tandem with the land's soft curves. I went past the Miller Ranch, which had a tall white fence, and then the old stone wall that had fallen and delineated the original German settlement's perimeter. All the sights were familiar. I was approaching the town. I sensed it. The terrain was starting to level out. The plains that encircle Fredericksburg are where the hills give way. I estimated that I still had 10 or 15 minutes left. Then, against the horizon, my headlights detected a familiar figure up ahead. A huge tree with bare, leafless branches. My stomach gave a weird, perplexed lurch as I approached. The large dead oak tree stood guard in the middle of the intersection. With a deep, perplexed frown, I slowed the truck to a crawl. It was not doable, not possible at all. It had been at least 20 minutes since I had passed the intersection. Is it possible that I turned around without noticing? I frantically searched for a rational foothold. Even though I don't drink, I was alert and wide awake. I couldn't have made such a basic, confusing error. The truck crunched unnaturally loudly in the unexpected silence as I dragged it over onto the gravel shoulder. Apparently, I got turned around. Perhaps I had turned off into a different, similar-looking ranch road that led back onto the pass. Though it seemed flimsy, it was the only plausible explanation. I put the truck in drive, performed a big U-turn, and started back the way I had come, feeling a little silly and more than a little uneasy. I was resolved to listen more intently this time. I kept my eyes fixed on the road, looking for the turnoff I must have missed, the spot where I'd gone wrong, in the blackness on either side. However, nothing was present. The path was an uninterrupted, continuous line. No additional paved roads branching out. No other intersections. It was merely Willow Creek Pass, the same route I had driven on the entire time, with the dark sleeping silhouettes of the hills and barbed wire fences on each side. A cold, hard knot of dread started to form in the pit of my stomach after another 15 or 20 minutes of driving. The intersection lay ahead, lit once more by the glaring white rays of my headlights, as well as the dead oak. I had returned. Real fear started to set in this time. Something prickled at the back of my neck, chilly and creeping. This was no error. It was not a bad turn. This was being done by the road itself. I was stuck in a geographical loop, and it was bringing me back here. The once calm and familiar route had turned into a prison. Its soft curves suddenly feel like a cage's bars. This time, I pulled the truck to a stop just beneath the dead oak's skeletal branches in the center of the junction. I destroyed the engine. The ensuing silence was terrible and awful. The rustle of invisible objects in the long grass, the distant cry of a whippoorwill, the chirping of crickets, and the reassuring nighttime sounds of the hill country were all vanished. My ears were ringing from the dead, crushing, vacuum-like silence that closed in on the truck's cab. The world beyond my windows seemed to have vanished. Knowing what I would find, my palms shook as I went for my phone. No assistance. The bars, of course, were deserted. I launched the GPS app. Right at the junction of Willow Creek Pass and the old farm road sat the small blue dot that stood in for my pickup. The road was clearly marked on the map. It continued toward the town. It displayed a clear route back, the road I had just left. I was caught in an impossible, frustrating cycle, yet it showed no signs of it. The digital world said that everything was normal. I could feel my senses telling me it wasn't. I needed to try something new. My father used to say that doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome was the definition of insanity. I was attempting to head east after coming from the west. That was being prevented by the loop. Two more routes, however, led to the junction. The pass ran north and south, intersected by the ancient farm road, which was barely more than a dirt track. There has to be a destination. It was better here than anywhere else. When I restarted the truck, the engine's unexpected roar was a welcome, violent invasion of the stifling quiet. With my heart pounding on my ribs, I inhaled deeply before swerving sharply to the right and traveling south on the dirt road. As the tires bounced over the sandy, rutted track, the suspension groaned and the vehicle rocked and rattled. At least it took a different turn. It was advancement. It was a decision. For what seemed like an age, I drove. The dirt road continued across pastures illuminated by the moon. With only fence posts and dense grass, the scenery seemed uninteresting. Then I noticed a big tree's shadow against the sky up ahead. A tree reaching for the stars with its twisted, naked branches. Like a stone, my heart dropped into my gut. It isn't possible. No, please. However, it was. The dirt road T-boned into a paved road at an abrupt finish, and there it was, the dead oak tree at the junction, its lifeless limbs mocking me in the moonlight. I had returned to the fork in the road. The unattainable image became blurred as tears of frustration and sheer panic welled up in my eyes. I felt like a rat in a maze, and every decision I made, every path I took, and every last-ditch effort to get out brought me back to the center. As if the tree itself were radioactive, I backed out of the crossroads and threw the truck into reverse. I fixed my gaze on its awful skeleton. I took the north route. I was forced to. I was unable to give up. The outcome was identical. The same terrifying scene was once again illuminated by my headlights after 10 minutes of driving down another dusty, abandoned track. The intersection, the tree, the paved road. For the fourth time, I found myself at the crossroads. I felt trapped completely, totally, and for no apparent reason. The will to fight left me. The plastic felt cool on my feverish forehead as I sat in the center of the intersection and let my head drop forward into the driving wheel. A sob, a ragged, raw cry of sheer anguish, ripped its way out of my throat. I had no idea what to do. Was this it? Was I destined to drive these 4 highways for the rest of my life, coming back to this one accursed location until my hope and gas ran out? The idea was so horrifying that it almost made me lose my mind. I sobbed frantically for a few minutes before a small spark of rebellion sprang alive inside of me. There was just one thing I could do. I had to return to Sarah's house, the way I had come. It is possible that the loop only operated in one way. Perhaps its purpose was to prevent people from moving forward. It was the single thing I hadn't done, my final chance. After wiping my eyes with my shirt sleeve and taking a deep, trembling breath that made my chest tight, I turned the truck around for the final time. I turned west and returned to the path I had traveled down so long ago. With my knuckles white on the steering wheel and my eyes fixed on the road ahead, I prayed for a change, or a sign that I had broken the loop. Then I caught a glimpse of it ahead. A figure appeared in the center of the road, directly in the line of my headlights. It was right in front of me, its arm up, palm out, as though to signal me to stop or wave me down. My initial idea was relieved that someone else was present, but as I approached, the relief turned into a tremendous perplexity that almost made me sick. She was the one. My heart seemed like it had stopped pounding completely, and my blood ran cold when my headlights showed her more clearly. She was dressed in the same basic blue t-shirt and faded blue pants that I was. I couldn't feel the wind blowing across her face, but she had the same shoulder-length brown hair. Now that I could see her face, it was a mask of complete and utter panic. She was so bare that it hurt to look at the fear in her big eyes. Her jaw was agape. In a whispered yell, I was the person standing in the road, gesturing for me to come down. It was an exact replica, a reflection of the fear I experienced within myself. The road appeared in front of me as the last protector of the loop, as though it had taken my own anxiety and given it a real form. I have no idea what overcame me at that precise moment. It wasn't a deliberate idea. The need to survive was a basic reptilian instinct. I didn't slow down. I continued. I failed to even honk. My tires screeched on the asphalt in a sound that was thankfully, painfully genuine, as I jerked the steering wheel aggressively to the left, and I blew it away. I drove by my frightened twin, my doppelganger. We looked at each other for a moment. I saw a silent, desperate cry, but I also saw my own fear reflected back at me. I disregarded the pleas for assistance, connection, and to stop. As I ran away from myself, I just gazed straight ahead while my foot pressed the accelerator to the ground and the engine roared. I took the chance of taking one quick look in my rearview mirror. The figure has vanished. Not only was the road behind me deserted, but the dead oak tree and the crossroads were also gone. It was a different road. The scenery was different. A softer, more open environment had taken the place of the recognizable cramped hills. I was on a road I had never been on before, but it felt familiar. It seemed to be linear. It had the impression of going somewhere. I had a sense of freedom, until I noticed the recognizable, reassuring sodium yellow glow of Fredericksburg street lights on the horizon. I didn't slow down. My tires squealed as I pulled into my driveway and headed straight home. Without even grabbing my handbag from the van, I hurried inside and locked every door and window. And it took me 3 times to slide the dead lock home because my hands were shaking so much. That night, I didn't get any sleep. I simply waited for the sun to rise, while trembling and wrapped in a blanket in a chair in my living room. I no longer used the back roads, with its bright lights and its regular, comforting flow of traffic. I stay on the main highway. What transpired that evening is unknown to me. Was there a loop in time? A warning? A trick of the terrain? All I know is that I met myself on a desolate road in the Texas Hill Country. Additionally, I have a shivering, unwavering sense, a deep-seated conviction that if I had halted, I would still be there if I had exited my truck and confronted that frightened version of myself. Both of us would, forever stuck at a crossroads, waiting for the next car to arrive, our 2 Linda Coopers. We will always try to find our way home, but never succeed. Home, but never succeed. Everyone calls me Hank, but my real name is Harold Carter. Last year, at the age of 47, I fulfilled a lifelong desire. I purchased a used convertible, quit my soul-crushing job, and embarked on a cross-country road trip. I wanted to experience the true America that lies in between the coasts. I desired to travel the historic roadways, dine at eateries with greasy spoons, and stay in budget motels. And that is precisely what I did for 2 blissful weeks. However, I entered the twilight zone on a lengthy, lonely section of US Route 50 in western Kansas. That section of Route 50 is known as the loneliest road, and the name is appropriate. From one vista to the next, it's a 2-lane highway, a straight line made by a ruler across a limitless expanse of featureless, flat prairie. The sky is huge. The quiet was deep. You can travel there for an hour without seeing another person, vehicle. It's a location that makes you feel little. It was late, most likely at midnight. Hours had passed while I was engrossed in the road's mesmerizing rhythm. The moon was obscured by a dense cloud cover, and my headlights appeared to be the sole source of light in the entire cosmos. I felt happy and at peace with my thoughts. Then my dashboard's tiny orange gas pump icon came to life. My heart fell. I'd been monitoring the gauge, but I had miscalculated how far it was to the next town. 100 miles can separate you from the next town out here. I looked at my phone. No assistance. I looked at the GPS in the car. The closest town on the list was still 70 miles away. I mentally calculated the answer. I would never make it. Panic set in, cold and piercing. The wide open area that had just appeared so lovely and freeing suddenly felt dangerous and unfriendly. It was terrible to think about becoming stuck here in the dead of night, in the midst of nowhere. I reduced my speed in an effort to preserve what with the little fuel I had left. I looked for any indication of life in the impenetrable blackness on either side of the road. Then I noticed it. It was only a dim, pleasant glow in the horizon at first. A sliver of light in the midst of the utter darkness. The glow intensified as I approached, eventually solidifying into the distinctive form of a gas station. It was one of those tiny, independent establishments that are hard to find these days. It included a little, well-lit office and a single vintage-style pump outside. Charlie's Fill and Go was inscribed in bright looping neon above the door. I felt a wave of relief so strong that felt as though it were a wave. In the midst of the prairie, it was a miracle and a ray of hope. The motor of my car sputtered as if it were dying when I got off the highway and rolled up to the pump. The station resembled a 1960s time capsule. Instead of a digital display, the pump was the traditional type with a revolving mechanical dial. The office was tidy and compact, with old ads and dusty oil cans along the windows. A man with a crimson rag on his hands came out of the office. He was older, perhaps in his late 70s, with a full head of white hair and a gentle, aged face. The name Charlie was sewn on a patch above his heart, and he was dressed in crisply pressed overalls. "Evening, friend," he remarked in a warm, gruff voice. "Looking a little low there. You're a lifesaver." "Charlie," I remarked with sincere appreciation in my voice. "I thought I was going to be spending the night out here with the coyotes." He laughed. "No, that is not possible. We're always here to help people in need." I remarked, "Please fill her up," as I got out of the car to stretch my legs. The air smelled like distant earth and rain, and it was chilly. Charlie inserted the nozzle after unscrewing my gas cap. The dial's number spun as the antique pump sprang to life. He made small chat and inquired, "Cross-country trip?" I answered, "Yes, sir, living the dream." He nodded and added, "Good for you. This is the nation to visit. Nowadays, people are in too much of a rush. They overlook all the positive aspects." As the tank filled, we talked for a while. He used lingo from the past, referring to money as clams and objects as the bee's knees. He was endearing and a true example of traditional Americana. He informed me that since returning from the war, he had been operating this station for 50 years. He carefully filled it up and replaced the cover after the pump turned off. He smiled and remarked, "That should get you where you're going. How much do I owe you?" I took out my money and asked. The price he listed was surprisingly low. I took my credit card out. Charlie gave a head shake. "I apologize, pal. Machines that are malfunctioning. It has been a long time. Only cash." Naturally, I replied without surprise. For emergencies, I usually carried a $100 in my wallet. This was definitely eligible. I gave it to him. After accepting the bill, he entered the office. He returned a bit later with my change. A stack of shabby old bills. "Well done, pal. Now drive carefully. Out here at night, the road can be deceiving." I thanked him once more, climbed back into my car, and turned on the ignition. It purred in order to no more sputtering. Life. I had an odd feeling of lethargy as I drove away from the station and back onto the highway. My mind felt hazy, and my eyelids felt heavy. I assumed it was simply my late-night relief finally getting to me. After a mile or so of driving, I habitually looked in my rearview mirror to give the small glimmer of light that had saved my life one last glance. The petrol station has vanished. My heart began to pound as I blinked. I took another look. Nothing was there. Only the empty, level plain extending into the darkness. Charlie's Fill and Go had lost all of its cozy, inviting light. It appeared as though it had never existed. My car skidded to a stop on the deserted highway when I stomped on the brakes. I looked back. Just darkness, nothing. I frantically tried to figure out what I was seeing. Had I dreamed it? Was I hallucinating the entire meeting because I was so eager for gas? I experienced a rush of adrenaline instead of the lethargy, and my gas gauge, which had been on empty, was suddenly pointing to full. Then I recalled Charlie's final remarks. Out here at night, the road can be deceiving. I felt a chill of dread. I needed to be certain. He handed me some change, which I groped in my pocket for. It remained. However, I noticed that the bills were old when I examined them in the dim light of my dashboard. Alexander Hamilton's picture was smaller on the $10 note. The silver certificate was the fifth. Although they had been out of widespread use for decades, they were actual money. My hands began to tremble. I took out my wallet to see if I had given him the $100 emergency bill. Tucked securely inside its fold, it remained. The money had never left my wallet, even though I had paid him. I didn't remain there attempting to solve it. I took the wheel. I kept my eyes fixed on the road ahead and drove quickly. Confusion and terror swirled through my head. The next town was a tranquil little village with one contemporary 24-hour petrol station. But I didn't stop until I got there. With my heart still pounding, I pulled in. I had a dash cam in my car because I used to drive in the city. I rewound the final hour's footage with shaky fingers. As I drove down the deserted highway, I observed myself. I observed the gas light go on. After that, I saw my automobile slow down, stop on the side of the road, which was deserted, and sit there in the complete darkness. My automobile sat on the shoulder for 10 minutes. The automobile was then seen turning back onto the highway and leaving in the video. No petrol station was present. Charlie wasn't there. My automobile was the only thing in a void, sitting still. I spent a lot of time sitting at the actual gas station's well-lit parking lot. The dash cam film is continuously playing. There was no denying the evidence. It had all been hallucinations. However, the gas tank was occupied. I had the old cash in my pocket. I had the $100 note in my wallet. The facts were a jumble of inconsistencies, an intractable logic conundrum. My road trip was over, but the happiness had vanished, leaving behind a persistent feeling of worrying. The actual I had never envisaged the stranger and more enigmatic America had come out to discover. I discovered that there are locations where the line separating the past and present is blurred. I was rescued by a ghost after running out of petrol on America's most desolate road. A good-hearted elderly man who operates a station exclusively for individuals in genuine need. Charlie's Fill and Go is a phantom service station that I know is out there, waiting in the dark, even though it isn't shown on any maps, for travelers who get disoriented at night. Thank you for viewing. If you had fun, which of these tales chilled you the most? Tell me in the comments. For more horrifying stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with your friends.